talk about, my background from Michigan, to becoming an entrepreneur. And some of the high-level lessons learned, in terms of how do you build a successful company. That's one aspect of it. And the second aspect of it is, which I've been pushing Khalif to do a lot more of, is I think Michigan is one of the most undersold engineering schools out there. How do we raise the profile of Michigan and also have a lot more partnership with industry? So these are kind of the three areas. I won't give long talks because I'd rather have it interactive. So just a quick background. I was born in India, in Hyderabad, India, and did my undergraduate in engineering in Hyderabad also at Osmania, and came here to do my master's. Very, very average student, and I'm being kind to myself. So, nothing spectacular or nothing, just a very average student, average background, nothing that really would point out. I mean, nobody would, in my school book, sign off and say, he's going to have a company that is worth $1 billion on NASDAQ, right? So, I think the story of my life from this point is really how ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things, right? You don't have to be, the most brilliant guy in the world. You don't have to be the most luckiest guy in the world. But a little bit of all these pieces together can catapult you forward to great success. So, I graduated from Michigan. I was recruited out of Michigan on a campus interview, and I started my career as a circuit design engineer at a company called American Microsystems in Silicon Valley. And my first job was to design mass-ROMs, or ROMs for Atari games. The big benefit of it was, the game used to be programmed into the mass-ROM, and then the mass-ROM was sold in a cartridge that you put it into the game. The really nice thing for us was that the pattern was given to us before. So we had all the games before they were released into the market. So something that, failed a leakage pin, a little bit more leakage, with the rejects, all of us used to get. So we had all the games before. So that was a good outcome of it. So I was there for a couple of years, and then I really started getting caught up in the Valley culture. The Valley culture is not to just go and work at a big company, right? The Valley culture is to go start a company or join a startup, build something, right? Something that is different, make your mark. So the first startup I joined was in 1983, straight out of my first job, and it was a company called Wafer Scale Integration. And the company's concept then was to essentially make solid-state disks. So take small flash memory dice and then sort the wafer and then have another metallization layer that would interconnect it and give you really a solid state drive. But the technology was not there, the market was not ready. So overall, the company had to change directions and went into some other areas. And finally, they got acquired in the mid-90s by ST Microelectronics. At that point, during that point, I got a really interesting opportunity to go abroad and work in Asia. So I was recruited by Samsung Electronics to go and live in Korea for 3 to 4 years and start a couple of businesses there for them. So that was, I think, one of the very big educational experiences for me because I was the only foreigner in Samsung's management team in the semiconductor side. So one of the very interesting aspects or learning experiences for me was really understanding how these large Asian companies work. What is their thinking? How do they think? What is the strategy they adopt? How do they go and compete in markets and why they are successful in markets? So did a 3 to 4 year stint there. And then I felt that I'm now ready to do something on my own. So I first co-founded a company called Malleable Technologies. And this was absolutely the best time. Late 98, in 18 months, we were acquired in mid-2000, right before the market crashed. So we were almost like the last train out of the station, right? So those were the go-go days. I don't think those days will ever come back, right? But those 2 years were a great ride. We built very high-density voice-over IP processors. So essentially, to be able to take, the internet was just starting then, to be able to take voice packetize it, and send it over the network rather than circuit switched voice networks. So I was there at the company that acquired us for about 3 months, and then I got the startup bug again. Then went ahead to found Cavium Networks in 2001. And this was probably, one of the worst times, right? The market has crashed, there is, doom and gloom, and I'm going around saying, I want to start a company. So it's, it was a tough start to go ahead and get it funded. And essentially what we did there is made a bet on a market niche. The internet was becoming very, very popular, and we felt that, it's going to go from being just a consumer type tool to an enterprise tool. And once it goes into the enterprise, network security would be very, very important. So that was what the company was founded on, was to really take, because security essentially wasn't software. And in software, the encryption algorithms, the other algorithms are very, very difficult to do and are very, very inefficient. Very, very poor performance if you just try to do it in software. So we built processors that actually did hardware acceleration and implemented those algorithms in hardware such that line rates and stuff like that could be much faster. Beyond that, then, once that line was successful, we established our market presence in this niche market. We started to expand and take our technology into more widespread markets. So what we do right now is we make CPUs. Intel makes CPUs for your PC or server. We make CPUs for the embedded market. So everything from switches, routers, wireless 3G base stations, radio network controllers, storage boxes, to also we've just started to branch out into the consumer market where we go and do our new products that have just launched right now are wireless video. So it's essentially being able to connect your Blu-ray player to your TV over Wi-Fi, no HDMI cables, for example, or being able to distribute any content to any screen wirelessly. So this is kind of a new area, and the company was started, in, like I said, in 2001. We went public on NASDAQ in 2007, and that was kind of one of the funnest experiences of my life, being actually going there and seeing the trading open and the first trades occurring. It was very, very satisfying. So what I'd like to do now is kind of jump over and talk about maybe 6 or 7 points that I've learned across my career. And some of these, or many of these, may sound like cliches, but they really are very, very applicable. So the first thing is, you can look through my experience. There's very few companies where there's a guy, he has this brilliant idea, he starts, and the company becomes very successful. There are cases like that, like Facebook, for example, is a case like that. Google is a case like that. But for most of the successful entrepreneurs out there, it is blocking and tackling, right, first. You do it in baby steps. You get some experience. You expand that experience. You get ready. Then you start and move on. There's very few, one shot, you suddenly build the most successful company out there. So always try and see what is the next step in that evolution that you're going to go to. So talking about the few points that I really wanted to highlight is, first of all, do or work in an area that you love. Going ahead and building a company or starting a company, you have to be totally married to it, right? So unless you really love what you're doing, don't get into that area. Because, just to say, I'm going to make money in it, or I'm going to try and make some money in it, I really don't like the area, I want to do this. So you really have to love what you do. Because the amount of work, the amount of dedication that is required is so huge that without it, you will never be successful. And I think this is a true statement everywhere, is unless you do something that you really like, you'll never excel at it. The second, I think, kind of dream that I learned is, right from your time, you as students today, you have to have that dream. You have to be able to visualize what you want to be 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 20 years from now. And the only way you do that is you start putting yourself in the position of where you want to be. in your mind, right? You're sitting, sitting by yourself for half an hour somewhere, or you're getting ready to sleep. Visualize what you want your career to be. Visualize yourself as chairman of Microsoft, or visualize yourself as the president of Intel, or visualize yourself as Facebook's president, right? And put yourself in that position and start thinking about what is the product, how could I make it better, what are the issues, where would I go into next? And these are really practice runs in your head, right? And one of the things that really helps you is when you really get to that position, the nervousness will go away. You say, you know what, this is not that difficult, right? So it makes you kind of yourself comfortable with the idea such that when the opportunity comes, you don't say, oh, well, I don't know whether I can do this or not. The third aspect, I think, is really passion. And this is actually, I think, a very, people talk about passion, but there's passion and there is passion. You really have to want to succeed. You really have to want to build a product that is better than everybody else. And you want to succeed more than your competitor. And this is something that will be in your mind 24 hours a day. This is not a job that you go in at 9 and work till even 6, 7 o'clock and go home. This is, you eat it, you live it, you sleep it. If you have that passion, guess what, guys? You've just increased your chances of success. The other very important point that I'd like to make is, the team that you build. I'm a great believer. Most of the people who, when they start a company, they'll take 2 of their buddies, right? 2 of the buddies who have been maybe in the same school or in the same university or with very, very similar backgrounds. What I've found is the company, Cavium, that I founded, the 3, 4 other guys that I got, I never knew before. They came from different backgrounds, from different histories, and different core competencies. And why is this important? I really believe that there are lookup tables in people's heads, right? Through their life experiences. You give the same problem to 4 different people who've had completely different backgrounds, they will come up with different solutions. If 4 guys are there who went through the same background, the same upbringing, the same kind of background, guess what? All 4 guys will give you the same answer. And what you're looking for is, in having a competitive edge, is a different answer. If everybody's thinking in one way, you want so many different inputs to come in that you can pick and choose which is the most successful one. The other very, very important thing is during your college days, interact. Interact with people from different departments. From music, from philosophy, from, every department possible, right? Because every one of these people have unique core competencies, unique skill sets, and there's a lot you can learn from that. Just hanging out with, EECS guys or just hanging out with engineering guys, guess what? That's good, but it doesn't expose you out there. Also, culturally, interact with people from China, Algeria, India, whatever, right? Because, again, all of these people are coming with a unique background, with a unique experience, with unique ways to look at problems. And this will enrich yourself very much. But I can't stress this enough, how important this is. So if you take a look at what Steve Jobs said, right? He said, you know what? We get very, very smart people. He may be the best musician, or the best, tap dancer, or the best whoever. If you're the best in any particular field, you are going to be able to contribute to part of the solution of the problem. The other very, very important aspect is, and this is the thing is, who are the first 50 people in the company, or the first 25 people in the company that you found? Very, very important. Because my feeling is, if you hire a grade A type person, a really smart guy, he will hire, in turn, grade A people under him because he's very confident of his abilities. He doesn't feel threatened. You hire a grade B person, guess what? He will hire a grade C under him because he's not confident of his capabilities. He will want somebody who will make him look good. So the first kind of 50 people in the company pretty much will determine who the company is, how successful is it going to be, and what the culture is going to be. So we were very, very anal in our hiring process for our first 50 people. Just the gate was very tight, just took the smartest people, the best people. And after that, guess what? It becomes routine. It becomes a way of life. It becomes the culture of the company. The other very interesting thing that I've noticed with many companies is, they say, I'm going to start the company to do A, and this is what I'm going to build. And, whether or not markets are changing, the environment is changing, they're going to go down that one path that they have set and kind of, sink or swim based upon that. But really, entrepreneurship, what I started the company on and what we've become 10 years later is very different. So you have to, at every step of the way, look forward and see what has happened to the environment and be able to evolve, change, shift accordingly, right? There is no royal road forever. There's a royal road for 2 years. You look around and you say, oh, these are my core competencies. This is a new, larger market that I can bring these core competencies to. You should do that. And if you see, most of the successful companies reinvent themselves every few years, right? The companies that do not reinvent themselves, that do the same thing they've been doing for 30 years, will eventually disappear. So every 5 years, you need to have a shock to the system, right? A new reinvention, a new way of thinking, a new market, a new core competency, a new direction. And also, this really helps you against your competitors, because if you have a very deterministic path of what products you're going to do, very predictable, you're shrinking Moore's Law, for example. Very predictable, large, well-financed, large companies can go ahead and shoot 3 years later, and by the time you get there, guess what? You're dead. So being unpredictable and being able to evolve in a very, very quick way is very important. The other aspect of it is, another very important aspect is decision making, right? To be successful, starting a small company and growing the small company, what is your advantage of being small? Your advantage, see, we compete against an Intel, we compete against a Broadcom, we compete against industry giants that have, $50 billion in revenue, huge, tens of thousands of people. So why are we successful in the end markets that we're choosing? The one big advantage that a small company has is being able to make decisions quickly. Being able to spot opportunities, being able to make decisions, and being able to move and execute faster. Now, these are big tankers, right? For them to change a direction or to evolve, there's multiple meetings, there is groups, there is consensus building. It takes a very, very long time. And in that time, the startup or small company is able to move very quickly, get a product to market before the large giants can, and grab market share. So quick decisions, and in our business, especially in technology entrepreneurship, it's very important on the speed of the decision. If you can make a decision fast and you're right 80% of the time, it's better than being 100% of the time correct and being slow, being 6 months late, because technology moves too quickly. One of the things that you'll see again from the Silicon Valley is that engineers are the best entrepreneurs. And in technology, what has been proven time and time again, that electrical engineers are the best. If you take a look at a lot of the companies out there that have been started, everything from a Hewlett-Packard to an Intel to many, many of the successful companies. Engineers are the best and the most successful entrepreneurs compared to kind of any other aspect out there. Because I think the training that they get, the thinking process, all of these things really give you a very good head start against like a finance major or against a marketing major, for example. So you guys are really lucky to have had that background, that foundation that will help you go to the next step. Other aspect is know your strengths well, but know your weaknesses better. Apply your core competencies to markets where you can bring an overwhelming advantage when you are a small company. You can't go out there and say, you know what, guys, my product is 10% better than Intel, buy it. Nobody will give you the time of day. So you have to look for very, very carefully select your markets. And how do you select the markets? You go into markets that are not just large and growing in a very predictable fashion. You go to markets where there's a disjoint, a discontinuity occurring. Say in networking, moving from kind of fixed switches to a software-defined network. Or in storage, going ahead and trying to do indexing of big data. Big data, the amount of data that is out there, big unstructured data is huge. How do you solve the problem of being able to retrieve one small piece of it? So always look for markets where there is a discontinuity, where there is no existing big guy applying resources to it. And this way, new markets are where new companies can become the next successful thing. So for us, it was network security. Network security was being done in software. We put it into hardware, much better line rates. Nobody else was looking at the problem because the really big benefit for small companies in these disjoint type markets is that the market is small by definition, right? If the market is small, the big guy, he says, I'm not going to waste my time on it. So that is really the point that you can go ahead, enter, establish yourself, and then use that as a springing block to other wider, larger markets. And finally, don't be afraid of failure. You guys are smart engineers, right? You'll start a company, it will fail. It's okay. You can get a job anytime you want. Don't take the easy, safe route out, right? Try once, like I said, it's incremental. Try once, it may be a fail. The next time, it may be a moderate success. The time after that, it could be a huge success. And all of you guys, like I said, you can always get a job. Don't worry about it. If you are smart, you can always get a job, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, 15 years down the road. So go out there, take a risk, and really set up, kind of the next big successful company. So with that, I'll kind of go finish up my talk here. And then kind of go into a little bit more of, from the faculty side, of some of the interesting things that are possible in kind of an industry-university partnership. So like I've told Khalil, I think Michigan is probably the single most undersold engineering school in the US. And the fact that it is such a good school, but not many people know about it. They say Michigan engineering, yeah, I've heard. I'm talking about it on the West Coast, or if you go down south. In the Midwest, obviously, it has a very good brand. And I think moving forward, universities, have to adapt from just doing academic research, which is applicable, 10, 15 years from now. You need to do that. But essentially build closer links with industry. I think Stanford has done a phenomenal job in the industry-university partnership. And I've been pushing Khalil to really go ahead and be much more aggressive in developing joint programs with companies like ours, for example. So, one of the things that will interest companies like ours is research that is applicable in the next 3 to 4 years. The 15, 20 year, coming up with the new transistor, yeah, very interesting, you should do that. But for companies like us, what is more relevant is the next 3 to 5 years. So for example, we make multi-core processors, right? We are right now shipping a 32-core device, 64-bit PC, an embedded processor with 32 CPUs on a single core. So what are the issues? There's huge amounts of data going in. Power consumption is a big issue. A very, very high line rate transmission with 10 gig links, 20 gig links. These are very, very big circuit design problems, heat dissipation, reducing power problems, and these are the types of things that are applicable for us in our next generation products. So you will see a lot of interest from industry in solving these type of problems rather than coming up with a new material for a transistor, which is applicable maybe 20 years later. So I think working with Khalil, these are some of the things that I'd like to do with the faculty here in high-speed SerDes or in low power consumption and chip packaging, number of areas that are going to affect us in the next 3 to 5 years. So something which is a little bit more topical rather than just pure research. So with that, I'd like to close up my talk and basically have a little bit more interactive sessions. Would love to answer your questions.
So you talked a little bit about the advantage of a small company being more nimble decision maker compared to a large company. So as you grow from a small company and becoming not a $1 billion company, but a $10 billion and a $20 billion company, and your number of employees is multiplying by the same factor, so how do you propagate that philosophy and nimbleness forward?
That's a very, very good question, right? So people say, what is going to stop you from becoming them, 10 years from now? And what really will matter is what the culture of the company is and how you've set it up. So essentially, what you need to really do is move from more top-level management to break it down into many more smaller pieces, each one of which has autonomy to be able to go down their own direction. So there are some companies that are completely top-down run. There's like 2 or 3 people, and they decide the grand strategy of the company. Guess what? That's not a scalable model, right? So every few years, every couple of years, we try to bring down decision-making and the ability to take risk one level down. And that's the only way you can scale. So essentially being able to break it down into more autonomous pieces that have the authority and the capability to build new products in their area without some brilliant guy at the top trying to figure out what is needed down there, because then it will never happen.
While maintaining, at the same time,
yes, the overall cohesiveness and the overall direction of the company, yes. So there are many things that we are doing for that. I mean, we grew from 0 to 900 people now in 10 years. And in another 10 years, we'll probably be, a few thousand people. So one of the things that our guys have said, and I've got a couple of my guys here recruiting today, is the way we operate hasn't really changed from 2001. The way engineering decisions are done, the way we still operate like a very, very hungry startup, right? Operate very quickly, operate very efficiently. But it's definitely a very important challenge to maintain that as you grow. Not only that, as you build offshore locations, how do you imbibe that culture in India or China or whatever? So that's definitely our kind of our next generation problem to solve. Yes?
Who was Cavium's first customer, and how did you scale during that period going from 1 to 5 or beyond?
My Cavium's first customer was a small startup. I still have the PO, $10,000, right? And by the way, that customer's still around. He's never grown. He's still that same size, and he's still buying product from us 10 years later. So overall, initially we went after small, innovative companies that were trying to build products based on our chips that were innovative. But that got us the attention. Our first big customer was Cisco. So that design, it took us a year or 2 to win. And once we won our first sockets in Cisco, that's where it really starts expanding. So initially you focus on some of the smaller, more inventive guys who are willing to take a risk because they are in the same situation as you are. And with that as a platform, you go ahead and try to attract the top 3, top 4, top 5 guys in every vertical market segment that you're trying to go.
You described yourself at the beginning as a student, an average student, and so on.
And I was very kind to myself, by the way. I'd like to stress that.
And you also are very successful. Would you hire yourself if you were in that position? And if not, why?
Very good question. Probably not.
But what I meant here was, what would you do as a student to make yourself more desirable, or what would you do? What would you look for in a student that they don't have?
I think obviously, there is an academic portion of it, which is, based upon, what are the courses you've taken, all that good stuff, your IQ, all that stuff is there. But I think there's another piece of it. And that piece really is, you can call it street smarts, you can call it hunger, you can call it an innovative mind, whatever, right? And that piece is really the, how would I say, there's no quantitative way for you to analyze that, right? And that is, there are 5 really smart guys. What makes one guy most successful compared to the other 4 is this indescribable piece, if you will. Like I said, it's street smarts, it's hunger, it's being able to think out of the box, being able to come up with unique solutions to problems, right? So I think overall, engineering students, for example, can really make themselves more desirable by really thinking about problems which are not purely engineering related, right? Think about strategies in different markets, Look at a market, study it in your free time, right? And get to understand it and say, all right, this company is here, these are the type of products they have, this other company is eating their lunch, how would I respond?
So how do you decide from a resume that missing piece? I mean,
You can never do it from the resume. It has to be. It has to be face to face.
Even if you find an average student, then you have to get some of them in. I mean, to talk
Yes.
to them, right?
Yes. So I think our interview process is even today is probably the most intense. I think an average engineer or student that we hire, I mean, we've hired people from Michigan every year now, goes through, I think, something like 8 to 10 interviews. And these are not just, subject and questions. I mean, people ask some really bizarre questions, if you will, right? And what they're trying to do is they're not looking for a right or wrong answer. You're looking for the approach to the problem. So I think we've built a very nice infrastructure to be able to bring in and be able to identify the really bright students. They're both students, they may be good GPA, but one student is really going to come up with innovative solutions, the other solution is not. So I think that's a very important core competency for any company to succeed.
You mentioned that you'd like universities to help you work on the next 3 to 4 year problem. Mm-hmm. Universities, though, are not terribly nimble or terribly quick or terribly good at deadlines. What's your
deadline?
What's your ideal? How would you ideally structure it?
See, again, let's look at it. Let's say we are looking for the next generation SerDes, circuit design, right? Basically being able to stuff, very very high speed data over copper or whatever, right? Projects with professors and students who are trying to come up with a circuit design for that. And you may not solve all the problems, but one aspect of it, you could have done a very, very nice implementation that we could use.
Okay. So,
Kind of sponsored projects, if you will.
yeah, more focused and collaborative and
Yes.
pieces you can take out.
Yes.
Okay.
You mentioned again university and industry partnership, and when I look at Asia and Europe, I see the level of interaction between university and industry is an order of magnitude larger, higher than US. Why is that so? Why in US there is, more reluctance apparently from both sides to get closer and cooperate and help each other?
I think the most I'm seeing right now is in China, right? The China, over the last 5 or 10 years, the partnership there has become phenomenal because there it's top-down driven. It's driven by the ruling elite, if you will, who are driving this partnership. Whereas in the US, it is not a centrally mandated thing. So independent universities and independent companies really need to get together, right? Because overall, I think without this, universities are going to have a problem and industry is going to have a problem because technology is changing at such a fast pace that you can't do everything yourself. It's just not possible. And again, I think, overall in the 60s, 70s, 80s, universities were in a good shape. They really didn't, they wanted to have, kind of academia religion, right? Is we don't want to do research and somebody tells me what to do. I'm going to figure out what is right and I'm going to do that, right? So, putting that religion aside, really doing things that are useful for industry is a strategic change that is happening, but that needs to happen at a much more accelerated pace.
So you talked about sort of the experiences that you learn when you start your first company or you do something and you fail and so forth. So aside from those experiences, how important are the relationships or the people that you work with or you get to know prior to, let's say, in your case, Cavium? How were those people, let's say, 10 years prior or maybe 15 years prior, who you either got to know at different companies, those connections, interactions, were they key, critical? Obviously, it's good to know people, but how key were those relationships, in your opinion?
I think they definitely help, but ultimately, it's the product you build, right? If you build a great product, people will buy. So the networking helps you kind of open some doors. So for example, I had personal relationships from previous companies and they were in Cisco. So at least they can help you set up a meeting, right? But beyond that, once the meeting starts, you're on your own. So networking obviously is helpful, but it's just an entry point.
Syed, I was in a career panel discussion yesterday. There were a lot of questions from students about the importance of a business degree in the context of entrepreneurship. You didn't go out and get an MBA, so I want your comment on that.
I think that's probably the biggest disincentive. I think really, when you take a look at it, I think having a business degree is absolutely not necessary. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of time.
Hallelujah.
Pardon?
Hallelujah.
Yes. It's a waste of time.
Does the companies actually, look at that as a plus? If you have a business degree as well as an engineering degree, it looks like, they might.
Not really. Not in our technology sector. We are in a technology sector, not my company, even other companies, right? Having a business degree it's okay. You've got a little bit more exposure, but the engineering degree is more important than the business degree.
I'm talking about management. If you're going to go into management.
No. If you take a look at other than one guy, none of my top vice presidents have an MBA degree, right? Take a look at most companies. Intel, for example, not many MBAs there. There are MBAs that do different functions. They may be in finance, or they may be in some product marketing, or some areas like that. But the most successful technology companies at the top don't have MBAs. And I don't think it's really necessary.
Go ahead.
The problem that you mentioned, though, is something that you mentioned earlier, is that younger students and the younger generation now, you said yourself you won't look at somebody without the good grade point average. Well, the MBA is a fundamental requirement for a lot of jobs that people are putting themselves up for. So when somebody asked yesterday, do you need an MBA? And then you say, no, you think it's a waste of time. In your upper management, though, and a lot of companies won't look at people without that. Is your company different? Would you look at somebody that and didn't have?
Not really. I mean, in our industry, in technology, for example, very, very few MBAs. Very, very few MBAs are out there. In the top management, I'm talking about that at the vice president level, running technology, running sales, running marketing. Most of these guys have an engineering background. And were engineers that moved into marketing and moved into operations, moved into sales. Those are what we find the most successful. And that's pretty much true of most of the chip companies, for example. You go to like a Cisco, for example, and you look at their VPs, I don't think even 5% of them have an MBA. So the technology industry is very, very different, I think. If you go and join, Procter & Gamble, you're right, or you join, but then you probably don't need the engineering degree. Yes.
Back to the partnership between industry and universities, the big challenge I see is that companies want to keep things secret, universities they don't, and also if you want to build a complicated system at a university, it's easier to do that on open source stuff, but then it's hard to then transfer that into a company that wants to make things proprietary. Like, how do you find the balance there?
I think that's a very, very good question, and the reason why a lot of this partnership has not happened in the past is precisely for this reason, right? Because companies want it to be proprietary. Universities want it to be open. But I think competition has become so intense now that to get a leg up, I think companies, so for example, let's say, I sponsored a project to do a 10 gig SerDes, analog circuit, right? I wouldn't mind if somebody else also used some of those concepts, as long as I got it first and I took it to market first.
So as long as you get that publication before it's actually published, you're happy?
Yes.
So how long a lead time do you feel like you need before it goes public?
I think academically, maybe, Dave, a year, somewhere in that time frame. Or even if you do publish it, you publish it more, some portions of the concept, that you can do kind of immediately. But the overall solution, for example, about a year, year and a half, that would be kind of the time frame.
So, especially when you started, when you started a company, like when you try to find investors to support you, it's more often than not that you're required to come up with a portfolio of patents. What's the how many, or what's the policy of your company to start towards patents? Do you have a big portfolio of patents, and you try to be very aggressively patent everything, or?
Yeah, generally, by the way, when you start a company in technology, you get money based upon 15 slides. That's all. So, by the way, it's pretty challenging for VCs. They see, 4 guys show up, show 15 slides, and why they're going to build the next Intel or whatever, and the guy writes them a check. It's pretty cool. Right? So overall, I think intellectual property is very important, and our guys are really, really good. So they don't believe in trying to patent a transistor today. There are some companies that patent transistors even today, right? I mean, stuff which is not really breakthrough, stuff that is not really, patentable, have slipped through and become patents. So we've done more fundamental patents, but I think just from an industry competitive viewpoint right now, we need to kind of expand that and do more some of the incremental patents that we would have not done, 5 or 10 years before.
Yeah, because it's not like a war chest. Like,
yes.
Which is sad that it's happening in companies, but it is true. Like you start using your patent portfolio as a shield towards other.
Yeah, it's more for defense rather than offense, right? Some guy comes and says, okay, I have these many patents. It's almost done by weight nowadays. I've got 1 kilogram of patents, you've got 2 kilograms of patents, okay. So this is how we're going to cross-license. It's unfortunate, but that's what it's become. Too many lawyers, I guess.
So neither businessman nor lawyer.
That is the ideal. What an ideal world.
A couple of more quick questions. Maybe Razi could go.
Did
you have a core group of supporters when you were starting your company, or fellow entrepreneurs, maybe different companies or something? Do you think that's important to have to kind of help support your risk taking, as you said?
Not really. I think again, you have to believe, you have to have the passion, right? And having other entrepreneurs expose their experiences. How did you raise money, for example, or which are the good VCs who will fund things in that area? So it helps in that aspect of it. But when you start, you're by yourself. You just sit down, draft a plan, put the PowerPoints, and go out there and try to raise money.
You said you're from Hyderabad, India. You've studied and worked in the U.S. and spent some time in Korea working. Can you talk a bit more about how that's influenced you, similarities, differences between working and living in these areas, and how that experience has helped you?
I think moving forward, guys, especially from the engineering side, living, working in different cultures is going to be more and more important, because guess what? These are going to be the areas of competition for us in the future, right? China, India, right? So overall, the exposure to, from a culture viewpoint, from a way of thinking viewpoint, from an exposure of different lookup tables viewpoint, it was invaluable. I think, if it's possible, every engineer should go and work in China for 2 years, or maybe in Korea, or whatever it is, right? It's amazing how much you learn. I learned a lot. India is very different, Korea is very different, obviously the US is very different, right? And just the exposure to these different areas, sometimes the cultural, competitive responses of one area versus the other can work in certain markets. Korean companies, very, very aggressive. They have certain ways that they go about building a product and dominating markets. US is a different style, India is a different style, and in different markets at different times, one of these styles and one of these lookup tables will prove very handy to you.
So when you're starting your company, did you ever have a point where you doubted your future success? And how do you overcome that? Or is it just a mentality where I'm never wrong, or you don't have time to think about it? So.
Basically, if you start a company and there's a doubt that you're not going to be successful, you shouldn't start it. So you have to be stupidly optimistic. You just got to be very stupidly optimistic, right? I'm going to do this, and it's going to work. And by the way, one of the important things also to learn is, kind of know when to hold, know when to fold, right? So there are times when, hey, it's over. To realize it, don't beat a dead horse, shut it down, move on to the next.
Wait, last question.
Just talking about your Samsung experience, you spent 3 years in Korea and came back, started a company right when the market crashed.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go back in time, would you still consider going to Korea for a couple of years and coming back, start your company, or start your company right away after?
No, I think the Korean experience for me was very, very interesting. It brought a different scale, a different way of looking at it, and really understood, because essentially now, more and more Asian competitors we are facing, right? Companies from China, companies from Korea or India. That really has helped me. So I wouldn't really trade that for starting something earlier, right? But the most important thing, guys, is take a risk, right? Don't be afraid. And do things which are not, which 90% of your class is doing. Just don't go and follow, okay, I'm going to go and join Intel, and I'm going to be in this big company, and I'm looking forward to my retirement when I'm 55.
Okay, with that, let's thank